Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It is the Wednesday Axon Bulletin. I'm Paul John Dykes, sitting in for Kev Graham, who sat in for Paul John Dykes on Monday. To my right is the return of Brian Degnan and the long-awaited return of James McKenzie. It's been a while, James. How are you?
I'm doing great, Paul. It's great to be back on the show. The last time I was on was during the COVID season. There was a lot of negativity around the club, but thanks to Mr. Postecoglou, we're in a much better place now. Exciting times ahead. The summer transfer window, so it's just good. Excited to talk about Celtic Leaf the next hour or so.
Absolutely, and I must touch on this because the last time you were on Axom was the kind of dark days, and I remember you coined the phrase "Lenny Ball," which I'd never heard before, and I found that quite amusing at the time. But before we do anything, you are wearing a jersey which is very appropriate today because it was worn in the first the first league game. I don't know if we played any qualifiers before it against Dundee United under Martin O'Neill, who was appointed Celtic's manager today. Did I get my maths right? 22 years ago, lads. Is that right? 22 years ago? Yes, Martin O'Neill on this day. And in 9 days' time, we appoint Ange Postecoglou. And what we done yesterday with Lawrence and Patrick is we actually looked at Martin O'Neill's second European campaign as a Celtic manager and how that panned out. And we tried to look at and compare where we are today with Ange Postecoglou and look ahead to the coming season. Now, you gentlemen didn't have the opportunity to answer all the kind of review style questions that we included on the 1000th episode just a few weeks ago. So you are going to have the opportunity to do that. And that'll open up the discussion around transfer business that we can and can't do or should do, the players that we have at our disposal, the manager, the board, everything else Celtic related, even the jerseys. Let's start off with the jerseys. Brian Degnan, we have seen a sneak peek of the home and potentially the away, which is a throwback to my time in the early 90s. What's your thoughts so far on the Celtic kits that have, they've been leaked. I don't know, sometimes did they do that on purpose? Is that part of the marketing? I'm not sure. But they've been leaked, the home jersey and the away jersey. What's your thoughts?
So I'm a bit of an outlier regarding kits. I've always got a weird taster in kits, but I actually really like the leaked home one. I know that's been a bit controversial. The only thing, I'm not keen on the silver stripes. I feel they should be gold. That would make more sense. But
yeah,
actually, I absolutely love a V-neck just in life. And my favourite ever Celtic kit was the '96 kit. They had the real sort of the pattern through the hoops.
Yeah.
And the leaked one's kind of got an element, not the same, but it's got an element of that pattern. And it just, when I saw it, it just reminded me of that. And that's my favourite ever home kit. So I really like it. Actually, I'm not quite as fond of the stripes on the away one, which seems to be the one everybody loves. So I probably like that, but I do like a really dark away kit. And talking about Martin O'Neill's era, my favourite ever away kit was, I think it was the 2004 season, and it was the black with the gold trim.
Yeah.
And I was, every time I think of it, I see Larson celebrating it. It had the collar, and it just absolutely, by a distance, my favourite ever away top. So, two obviously different eras there, but I'm excited about the new kits. I think they look good, and I don't wear tracksuits and anything like that much, but the Adidas stuff has been class, and I do quite like it just for kicking about the house and when I'm working from home in a shirt and tie and my Adidas trackies. It's quite good. So
like it. You know how passionate I am about jerseys, and yes, some people might think, let's get talking about gossip and transfers. However, it is an important part of the pre-season. Every year now, 3 jerseys, 3 kits are released, and there's a few points I would throw in there. I like the home jersey, but I agree with you about the silver elements. Got to be gold because silver's for runners-up. I mean, there'll be some tenuous link. They might say it's the colour of the European Cup, as I still call it. The second jersey, it could have been better, I think, Brian, but it is based on one of my favourites of all time, so I'm maybe being ultra thorough on that one and critical on that one. However, what I would say, that black kit you're talking about, right, that was the first Celtic jersey ever, home or away, to have the Lisbon star above the crest. That was the first one that it appeared on. And also, I didn't like it at the time, Brian. It's only now, when I'm looking back on the collection of jerseys, and I see that strip and I think that was amazing. I don't know why I didn't like it at the time. And finally, before I come to your thoughts on the new jerseys, James, I was going through some of my old photos because obviously I keep going on about this and I keep getting slagged for mentioning it, but the jersey book is coming out. And do you remember the pink and silver one? Silver with the pink Coviet. Yeah, the Airdrie style one. The jersey that was never worn. I was looking through the pictures and it looked okay. It actually looked all right, lads. Sorry, I'm just putting that out there. I'm just putting that out there, James. So what's your thoughts on the two new jerseys?
My only sort of pain with the home shirt was the silver stripes, as you both mentioned. I was a big fan of the away shirt when I first saw it. But then there was the front of the top that got leaked first. But then we saw the back of the top. They didn't continue the stripes to the back of the shirt. It's just all black. But
strange.
It could have been better. I'll still buy the shirt, obviously. You touched on the training gear as well. I don't know if you've seen the Teamgeist gear, the tracksuits and the tops. It's
no,
black.
yet, no.
The Celtic neon logo. They put it up a couple of months ago for sale, I think. It's expensive, but it's really, really nice.
Love it. All about the merch. Listen, we have been linked to various players, as will happen over the summer months, and I'm sure we will be talking about some of the targets as the pre-season progresses. Always find it funny, Brian, going back to last season's targets, and and the season before that, in actual fact, where we're looking at players like Stephen Fletcher, and we're asking questions like, should we sign Fletcher or Tonev or Ajeti? And we know what happened there. Hopefully there will be no faux pas this pre-season. Let's talk about Ange's 12 months in charge at Celtic, Brian. In specifically, the focus being on the recruitment. He's not had many missteps so far. Do you expect that to continue this pre-season?
Yeah, it seems to be a feature of Ange's career. Wherever he's been, he seems to sign very well. And it's not necessarily the individual players are excellent in themselves, but it's the way they merge into the team, the way the team dynamics always function seem to be something he's exceptionally good at. He made some quip about when his missus is shopping and she knows exactly what to buy in the shop. He knows that when he sees a player, he knows that player, he knows their character, he knows they're going to fit. And I think that if you look at the recruitment under Ange, it's maybe, you could argue McCarthy hasn't really shone, but then there's maybe question marks if that was already arranged before he came in. But everyone else, you have to say, Ideguchi, sorry, is the only other one because I've not seen much of him. But if you look at Hatate, I think Hatate's been really good. I know he's been a wee bit up and down, but I think next season he's going to be absolutely flying. I think O'Reilly is insane potential. I really actually think he's the way Van Dijk stood out and you think he's going to go somewhere special. I see that with Riley. Obviously Jota, Abada came out of nowhere, 20 years old. Kyogo, Maeda. I mean, it's just, you can go through it and you think these are really special players. And it's not just that they're good players for this season. They've almost got that hero status. And, we talked about, Martin O'Neill coming in and we think about the Seville team and you think of these guys that are so, adored 20 odd years later. And I think there's enough guys in this team that you can imagine being real icons for Celtic.
Yeah.
You talk about your Jotas, your O'Reillys, Carter Vickers. I think Juranovic is going to be up there as well. So I'm really excited about who Ange is going to bring in. But what I'm most excited about is the manner in which he went about his business, particularly in January. Now, Ange was quite vocal, as he's want to be, about the summer transfer window and how it wasn't done quick enough for him. He wanted players and he wanted them quick. And I thought that was really refreshing how he said, there's no cover up. He's like, no happy. We need to get this done quicker in the future. Mm-hmm. The first opportunity to correct that in January, he signed 3 players before the deadline day opened. Now, that's a man that goes about his business the right way. And I fully suspect, and I think probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have a complement of players. I think we'll have maybe 3 or 4 players in that are first team ready that are going to make a difference. I see it being a real quick turnaround because I think he's going to go on a full pre-season with the squad. And again, you need to think as well, having a full pre-season with guys like O'Reilly, like Hatate, like Maeda, Jack Marcus never had a full pre-season either, although he came in the summer. That's going to help them so much. So if you can get some new players in and bed them in at the same time as these guys, exciting stuff.
It is. It really is, Brian. And I don't want any negativity to creep into my thoughts, right? Because when James last came on to Axom, It was the dark days, like, and we don't want that to happen. But history does tell us that when we're in a position like this, a position of relative strength, and you know as a fan, right, we need another 5 or 6 players to really bolster us, and I'm including Jota and Cameron Carter-Vickers in that. History will tell us that we've not really seen it through. But I think the saving grace this time round, James, is something that Brian's already mentioned, the Ange Postecoglou effect. If it's not going to happen, he will definitely make it happen. Are you confident that the board and Ange can work together? They've worked pretty well, really, over the piece, that we can get what we require in this pre-season?
Yeah, I think Ange coming in has seen a real sort of change in the transfer direction in the market. The last sort of few years, it's been projects that never really worked out. Your Bios, your Shreds, those sort of players. Whereas when Ange has come in, it's been first team ready players that are going to make an impact as soon as they come into the team. If you look at Kyogo beside him, he was first team ready. He scored, I think it was it his debut against Jablonets? It was his first start, I think.
Yeah.
The real change in direction in the transfer window has been the thing that stood out. And his eye for a player as well. The only real duds that we've signed were players that look like either board signings or they were signed before him.
Mm-hmm.
Like Liam Scales, I don't think that was an Ange signing. Urigide and Shaw, they both haven't really worked. They came in before him. But I think if he's backed in this summer transfer window, because he said in his speech, we're going to come back bigger and better after he won the cup. So I trust Ange to push us on even further, because we've got Champions League football to look forward to. And if we want to build a team for that, there's a few more improvements we can make alongside hopefully Jota and Carter-Vickers coming in.
I totally agree with that. Now, let's get the commenters, the viewers involved as much as possible. Jungle Lion, regular visitor to our YouTube channel. If you are on YouTube, make sure, give us the thumbs up on the video and also subscribe to the channel. Hit your notifications bell. We are going to be going live throughout the pre-season, and there's loads of other content lined up as well as competitions. Afternoon Boys and Girls, says Jungle Lion, and also Ryan Kelly is the same afternoon Wednesday crew. Your regular Wednesday crew, of course, involves Kevin Graham, who will be back very, very soon. Lanky67 comes in, hits the like button. Thank you very much for your support. And Brown Warrior, picking up on the Lenny Ball comments from earlier, reminds us that Lenny did take us to the last 16 of the Champions League, and Brendan Ball took us to defeat by Lincoln Red Imps. Yeah, I remember it well. And I think that when you compare and contrast, is there even an argument that Lenny did better than Brendan in Europe? Brian, do you think that's fair to say for Celtic as a manager?
I think, well, you can't. It's hard to argue. Last 16 Champions League, beat Barcelona at Parkhead. I don't think anyone ever criticises. I certainly no one on Axion's ever criticised Lennon's first run. I think everyone acknowledges he was the right man for the job at the time. Mm-hmm. It's the second run where things take a turn. So I think context is important. Whenever Lennon's mentioned, he'll always be a hero for many people. Still a hero for me. I love him. Last season was a blip, I would say. But if you look at his managerial career, especially at Celtic's first time, he done a great job. So, and it sounds daft to say, but even in that short time, football's changed quite a lot. And Rodgers, when he came in, we beat off Lincoln Red Imps. I think that was, the Artmedia Bratislava of the Brendan Rodgers era. So, it happens. But Rodgers got quite a few slappings in Europe. But he was trying to play his style and just get players to raise their game to make sure they impose that style on other teams in Europe. Similar to what Ange is going to try and do. The difference being, I think Ange's style was more effective for it. But I expect, I said it when Ange first came in, I says we're going to get a few black eyes along the way. Yeah. But if we persevere, we will up our levels. And I think you saw that in Ange's. So sorry, often a slight tangent, but I saw people criticising Ange in Europe. And I'll be honest, other than the very start, the Michelin, when we were totally all prepared, which was out of his hands, we get 9 points in the group stage Europa League with a team that was in its infancy. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a bad shout. I think in any other year we'd have qualified, similar to Martin O'Neill actually as well, remember?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think that's no bad going. the only real downside to Ange's European campaign for me was the Bodo Glimt game, where we got Ange balled. We got done by a team who were doing it better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you need to always look at context with Celtic in Europe. Some days results can be disappointing, there could be reasons for it. Some days we're just not good enough. And just going back to the point about Lenny, he took us to the last 16 in Champions League, but then we also had the chance to progress in Europe against Copenhagen and absolutely wet the bed. So every manager's had their ups and downs in Europe, so I don't think you can pick moments in time and say they were good, they were bad.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's got positives and negatives, and there is reasons behind it as well. So context is always key, to quote Al Morrison.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. Now, you made a point there. I'm looking back on the European campaign from last season, James, and the Bodo Glimt one was very disappointing, and Ange said that himself. But I remember being at the game. I'm pretty sure I was at the game with Tony Haggerty, and I was very disappointed at home against Bayer Leverkusen. And I remember coming home and then watching the post-match and seeing the social media kind of response, and it wasn't the same as my response, because I thought that we were done over. So you watch the game back, then you start thinking, well, yes, we get hammered 4-0, but dubious penalty, at best dubious. It was never a penalty, Carter Vickers. And 3 individual errors, I think, 2 by Ralston, 1 by Turnbull that night. So then you start, with hindsight, looking back on that particular night and thinking, well, on another night, on any other given night, but Ange was true to his philosophy and his style of play. That was one night it didn't work, but on other nights it did. And we've seen some fantastic displays, particularly away from home as well, James. There's no way this man's going to change his approach in Europe, is there? And as Brian says, though, it seems to be working better than it did when Brendan Rodgers did similar and just stuck to his guns. Why do you think that is?
Ange says all the time he doesn't have a plan B. His plan B is to do plan A better than they've done it before. I think we saw Brendan, we got proper hammerings when we came across a team of real quality. But then in the Europa League, when you came across, this season we played Leverkusen and Betis, they're sort of upper level teams in their respective leagues. When we played RB Leipzig, we gave them a good game under Brendan, we can't forget that. Then when we came against those teams under Ange, I thought, apart from the Leverkusen blip at the start of the group stage, it was the first game of the group, the team's still in its infancy, we gave Leverkusen a real good game away from home. We got unlucky that, I think it was just maybe fitness levels, that we fell away towards the end of the season. That's been the story across this season. We gave Betis a really good game away from that. It was a very entertaining game. We had Albion Ayeti up front in that game as well. I think, was Cal McGregor playing in that game? I think he was injured at that point. Was he playing?
Was it? No, it was a home game he returned for. I don't know if he played in the away game.
Yeah, he didn't play in the away game. So we gave them a good game without our captain and with Albion Ayeti up front. And then we beat them at home with essentially a B team. We had Saza Urigide playing at right back.
I know.
So I think if the European campaign this season's anything to go by, I think we can really go at some of these bigger teams. A lot of people are saying it's going to work the same way Brendan's was, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it works. He's really going to go at these big teams.
See, the thing, I mentioned this the other day, I bumped into someone outside Hampden, and he was basically saying he wants all the biggest names you can possibly give us so we can go toe-to-toe with the very best, Brian. I guess when the draw comes up, I'm a wee bit more cautious, I guess. I'm kind of thinking, is there any way we can, get the 9 points? Because that is like a target that you would ordinarily expect to get through. And the O'Neill season you mentioned, Lawrence, Patrick and I spoke about yesterday, that was the highest points tally for a team who didn't qualify at that time. 9 points, won the 3 home games, lost the 3 away games. But I don't know, I think I'm probably somewhere in the middle. You want some kind of glamour tie, but you also want to progress. And I'm always looking at that as well. Brian, what's your kind of ethos when you come into the groups? Do you just want all the big names, or do you try and say, well, we might have a situation where we can get a home and away against one of these teams and maybe pick up points elsewhere?
So, going back to a key catchphrase, I'm a bit of a romantic around football and around Celtic, and I think that at Celtic Park we're capable of beating anybody. I always believe that, and I know sometimes we can look quite negatively at European history in recent years, but then some fantastic European nights. Gordon Strachan's European team was absolutely sensational at Parkhead. You know, we always seem to pull it out the bag. And I mentioned Lenny earlier on with Barcelona, and I think, you know, Ange showed in glimpses that we're a team special. So I'd be quite comfortable against anybody. Now, that doesn't mean I want the hardest straw. So I think it's looking at expectations versus aspirations. So you want to aspire to face the biggest teams and still qualify at the group. The expectation is if you get a really hard draw, you might need to drop into Europa League. Mm-hmm. But one thing we need to be cautious about, and I don't necessarily think it's a snobbery, but sometimes we think the biggest names are the most dangerous. When we got I've mentioned Bodo Glimt, when we got them, most people would have been like, oh, jackpot, that's us cruising, we're going to win the Conference League. And we got battered. And better teams in that league went out to much lesser opponents. There were some big names that just didn't perform. So just because the club's got a big name, it doesn't mean that team that season is as good as somebody else. So some people talking about, oh, I hope we get teams like Salzburg or Leipzig, and you go, right, but Real Madrid might have a rotten season next season, so it might be the right time to get them. So I don't think you can really sort of legislate for picking the teams. Obviously, in theory, you want the easiest straw, but I would say my challenge would be you don't know what that easiest straw is going to be because you don't know what the state of play is going to be in each team. So the long-winded answer is I don't really care, but I think I would probably like the sort of big names just for the glamour ties and get the eyes back on Celtic. And I genuinely believe we can go toe-to-toe with anyone. And like James said, one of my favourite games for last season was Leverkusen away. And although we get beat, I thought we were a better team and we looked great. And to play in that environment, the way we played, I thought it was inspiring to watch. I really thought it was something that I hadn't seen for Celtic in a long time. Just gone, you know, chest puffed out, playing your football against a really good team in their ground. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we lost at the end. But again, you have to question our fitness wasn't great at the time. We had fitness issues all over that season. In the last 10 minutes of the season, we all seemed to die. And that's when they conceded. So I don't see that happening next season. So bring it on, is what I would say.
Now, James, I'm going to have to bring this up as well as bring it on. We brought up a clip recently of Axel's reaction to Ange getting the job. And this was, I've not got it by the way, I should have had it prepared, but I did play it the other week there where you were missing, Brian. This actually happened days before Ange Postecoglou was appointed as Celtic manager. Of course, he was appointed on the 10th of June. And the question was asked, Kevin Graham asked Brian Degnan the question around aspirations of, you know, what to expect, if you like, in the coming season under Ange. And Brian gave him an absolute glowing report, says that he's excited, he thinks this is the way to go, and I remember actually looking back in it a couple of weeks ago thinking, wow, we've been led to believe that Axom were completely dismissive of Ange. It wasn't really the case. You watched that episode back, Brian, and you were absolutely spot on in your assertion that Ange was the man for the job.
Doesn't happen often, to be fair. Doesn't happen often, but I'll take that one.
You might be surprised if you troll through some of the archive, by the way. But James, what's your relationship been with Ange upon appointment? The rocky start. When did you get the full buy-in of? When did Ange get your full buy-in, rather?
I feel like a lot of Celtic fans, most hadn't heard of Ange before he got the appointment. We just had the devastation and not getting Eddie Howe, who were all set on for about 3 months. He was going to be the man. So to be so set on getting him, and then that not to happen, everybody was a bit disappointed when Ange got the appointment. But you do your reading on the new manager, you hear it takes a bit of time, maybe a couple of months, but after that sort of rocky period's done, it's a roller coaster ride and you're going to enjoy it. So I was prepared I knew how big the rebuild was, so I was prepared to give him the time, get his team together. I said, as long as we're within 10 points of Rangers this season, I will be happy. We exceeded all my expectations, so I was absolutely delighted with it. Everybody was on his back after, I think it was the Livingston game. Mm-hmm. I think it was our third defeat in the first 6. I wasn't one of those. I was prepared to give him the time of day. I was going to give him till the end of the season, see how we are doing then, and he's blown everybody's minds, exceeded all expectations, and it's all credit to the manager.
He has blown our minds, that's for sure. Lanky67, our thoughts are with you. Hopefully everything works out for you, pal. Thanks for joining us today. Ridiculizer hated everything Adidas has done over the last couple of years for us. 3 stripes on the collar, 2 on the sleeves, silver, pink, disaster after disaster. The shape around the new badges. Howling, Ridiculizer is not convinced about the new jerseys. I'm getting some vibes here, Brian. And the thing is, some people say, it's just the jersey, as long as it's got the hoops. But, I'm one of these aficionados, I guess. I go right into the nitty-gritty of every jersey that comes out. I ask myself, right, what's actually influenced this? And, even that pink and silver affair, which I don't think I'm going to convince you was a nice strip. They harked back to some old green and white jersey that we wore back in the day with the Coviet. But I've learned so much about the football jerseys, and I've got to say that the dedication of these guys that actually collect them is astonishing. I'm going to also say, James, in my Celtic supporting life, and maybe it's because I got into watching Celtic when names and numbers weren't really a thing on the back, I've only had one name and number on the back of my jersey, and it was when I guested at Celtic Park in a charity game, and my own name was on the back of the jersey, and 7-1 was there to pay homage to Neil Mockin. Have you got a number and name on the back of that jersey?
Yeah, he was an alright player. You could maybe call him one of the best Celtic players.
Oh, there you go. I love that number as well. It was just it brings back those memories. The season we looked at was the season after Martin O'Neill's first treble-winning campaign, and we went to places like Rosenborg and Porto and Juventus. We put a really good account of ourselves on the European stage, eventually getting knocked out with 9 points, as you were saying before, Brian. We then came up against Valencia. Again, they beat us away. We won at home. We go out on penalties. It seemed at that point that we were making progress in Europe, and so it was to be proven. The next season, we get into the UEFA Cup. And yesterday, UEFA Cup final, that is. And yesterday, I was talking about progression. And I think we're all in agreement, Brian, that this season was... Europe was a bridge too far. If we got anything in Europe, we'd have all been chuffed to bits. But, that game against Midtjylland, he was right up against it, was Ange. Arm tied behind his back. And I think that, if we go in and put a good account of ourselves in this season, we might revisit this next season and say, well, let's start progressing now. I don't think we can be overly critical, even at this stage, even though this is Ange's second season in charge. And at this moment in time, that old argument between Kev Graham and I, are we a Champions League team? Are we a Europa League team? Are we looking this season, Brian, to cement ourselves as a Europa League team? Or do you think we can cement ourselves as a Champions League team and actually look to progress out of that group?
So again, aspirations versus expectations, right? So aspirationally, I think we should be able to... I don't think there's a huge gap between Europa League and Champions League, other than the very elite. I think that, again, you can get a really bad Europa League draw as well. So, again, it depends on the state of play of the teams, but I still think we need to aim to be a Champions League club. I think that's where we should aim to compete, try and get into the last 16, try and get into the last 8. It might seem a million miles away, but we need to aim to get there. If we don't have that aspiration, we're never going to achieve it. I don't think we should ever settle for being just a Europa League team or just a conference team or Europe's just for money. The league's the most important thing. I never buy into that. I think we should be aiming as high as we can. Whether that's realistic, we don't know. It remains to be seen. But I think it can be, and I think that everything we seem to have learned about Ange Postecoglou, he's determined to leave his mark not only on Europe, but he's determined that Celtic leave their mark on Europe again. And I don't think for a second he'll be anything but convinced his team can go as far as they can in the Champions League and challenge Europe's best. And that's where he sees it. And I'm all in. And I think if there's a man to get there, it will be him. James mentioned there about how he'd have took us getting close to our rivals this season. And I said the same. I thought that it might have been a bridge too far for us to get to win the league. I thought just in the scale of the rebuild, and just knocked that right out of the water. His challenge, again, and they remember, he's never really had success his first season anywhere. It's always took at least a season and a half or 2 seasons. And he came to Celtic and went, can you have that this time? I need to improve to make sure we have success instantly. And he'd done it. Against all odds, all sort of predictions, he'd done it. if he's telling us, I want to make my mark in Europe, I believe him, and I firmly believe we'll get there. So again, long answer to a short question, but I think Champions League club, I think we have to aim to be. I think Kev Game put it excellently. He says we're kind of completed domestic football. We need to try for Europe, and domestic football will take care of itself. And I totally agree.
I like the long answers, Brian. That's what this game's all about. Robert Hyland reckons at the moment Europa is our level, not yet ready. I'm kind of on the fence here because nothing would surprise me about Ange. I love this fairy tale element that, Jock Stein went to watch the 1954 World Cup. And the reason he was there was it was a reward for Celtic winning the double the season before. There was 3 or 4 players in the Scotland squad, including nearly mocking Bobby Collins, Bobby Evans, and I think maybe even Willie Fernie was in there. And he was mesmerised by, the great Ferenc Puskas, the great Hungarian side. Mesmerised, total football before it arrived in the Netherlands. And of course, they went right to the final. They go 2-0 up against West Germany as it was, and eventually get beat 4-2. But then that magic Puskas dust is sprinkled on Ange years later when they both meet each other in South Melbourne. And Ange is the captain, and you know that's filtered in, just as it kind of filtered into the psyche of Jock Stein back in the 50s, and he was able to implement it in the 60s. I think it's also there. It's part of Ange's psyche that, this is a man in Puskas that had got to the World Cup final. He was a man who got Panathinaikos to the European Cup final as a manager, unfancied Panathinaikos years later. So we love a fairy tale at Celtic. Are we just dreaming at this moment in time, James? Is it going to take another season, do you think, before we find our proper level in Europe?
I feel like it all depends on who we get in the groups. I think I would want a favourable draw. I want the easy teams. I'm not a big fan of the glamour-tised stuff because I know we're going to get battered about the park and everybody will be raging after the group stage is done. I want an easy ride through the group stages, hopefully get to the next round. I think if we get a competitive group, we can give it a proper good go. But I think third place and a deep run in the Europa League I think that would be a realistic expectation this season for Celtic.
Well, the thing, again, Kev and I had various ding-dongs about this when we first started a Celtic State of Mind, and at that time, 2017, Brendan Rodgers at the helm, and, I'm thinking we are a Champions League team, we really need to be. I'm thinking back then what I'm thinking now, we've got an opportunity to do something. And Kev was playing it down, he's saying, at this moment we're nowhere near that. And he was proven right. I mean, Kev Graham was proven right by saying it. But what annoyed me right up to, fairly recently, the last AGM, is our club was telling us we're not at that level, Brian. So it was almost like they're managing the expectations. And regardless of who it was, a Scottish club got to a European final this season. So that excuse can no longer be wheeled out whenever Bankier gets, a fright at how much investment would be required to make an impact. And I don't think the Celtic fans will let them forget that either. Now, I said earlier on that you two gentlemen weren't able to answer all the questions that we put to the team on the 1000th episode of A Celtic State of Mind. I think we're on episode 1013 now of the actual broadcast stroke podcast, depending on how you listen or view it. And there were quite a few interesting posers thrown out. So I'm going to ask you guys, and I want the commenters to get involved as well. The first question, I'm going to start from the back in case we run out of time, because I started at the front yesterday. I think I asked 3 of them. The first one would be, right, it's nearly 20 years since Seville. Brian Degnan, I'll come to you first. And obviously, it's the anniversary of us appointing Martin O'Neill on that famous day, 1st of June 2000 it was. James, were you born? Serious question.
3 or 4 months before I was born.
Wow.
I'm October 03.
You've just
That's tremendous.
That's it.
That's tremendous. Well, I'm going to be asking you this question in any case, James. 20 years since Seville, Brian, who from Ange's team would get into that Seville team?
So I made a wee list in preparation, so just let me get it here. So we'll stick to the same formation as the Seville team, the 5-3-2. I think Joe Hart in goals, replacing Big Rab.
The big man.
Jelic, replacing Agat. That might be controversial, but big fan of Juranovic. Then you get Carter Vickers replacing Bobo. Now, I love Bobo, and I hope he's not watching in case he gets me, but the big man was rash, and Carter Vickers does give you that physicality. I then get Mialbi, Boharin, Tomo, left wing back, keeping them the same. Lenny, Lambert, keeping the same. I just think in that game that they two were excellent. I am replacing Petrov with Callum McGregor, which again maybe a bit controversial, but I just think that wee bit of extra, jinking it out, dragging with the ball maybe would have been good. And of course you can't replace Henrik or Chris Sutton up front. And I was just thinking actually about Henrik. Somebody should write a poetry book about Henrik Larsson. I think that'd be
That's an idea. That's a great idea.
That'd be.
Well, on that point, firstly, Brian, you have made more changes to that Seville team than anybody else who's been asked that question, incidentally. Although I think Alan Morrison almost completely replaced the bench. He kept Jackie and he kept Sean Maloney, but the rest of them he replaced them, which is fine. But in terms of the starting 11, you've made 4 changes, which is more than anybody else, but I think you've made good arguments for them. Some people have dropped Neil Lennon for Callum McGregor, which was an argument as well. I've never really considered a gap. I think that's quite an interesting change to make, because although he had pace to burn and we knew that, I think his distribution at times, was questionable, and I think Juranovic is a different beast when it comes to that.
There's no slouch. And Sutton and Larsson.
Yeah.
That's what. And if you put Tomo on the left and Juranovic on the right, wow, that could have been even more special. Could
have been awesome. And the other couple of questions I'd like to ask about that before I move on to James, Brian, is Hartson, if fit, he would have started, but who would have dropped out? Or would he have started? I guess is the question. I'm just assuming he would have started.
I know. I probably would have had him coming off the bench, if I'm honest. I just think, yeah. I think I'd have probably I kept the big man on, because I think I always think when you beat guys like that, there's such a different proposition for the players you're up against, and just him coming on with that robustness and power and drive late in the game, especially when they were kind of sitting back at the time, I think it would have been ideal to lump balls into. So I'd have probably left the big man on the bench.
I think he's maybe mentioned that himself because of the heat more than anything else, Brian, that he probably wouldn't have made the 90 minutes, and obviously extra time as it became. Jungle Line reckons McGregor in for Neil Lennon as well. The other question is, going back to what Lubo was saying a few weeks ago, he would have wanted his swan song to be the UEFA Cup final rather than the season before. Would he have made a difference? Would you have had him on the bench maybe? Oh yeah,
Miravchik was so special, wasn't he? He just had that real magic, and it was sort of he was almost predictably unpredictable, And I just think in any team he would have added something. So if you can imagine bringing him on as a sub, just to keep that wee bit of magic, that'd be special.
Aaron Ells making a few changes as well. A lot of people used to just say, or did say a couple of weeks back, yep, change a goalie, everybody else stays the same. But you guys are just tinkering with the team now, so that's fine. Hart, Juranovic, Baldy, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Tomo, McGregor, Petrov, Lambert, Jota, Larsson and Sutton. Interesting you've kept Baldy in there, because obviously you think of what happened on the night and you might think drop him. Valharin, of course, was, I thought, a good performer in Europe. He had scored a couple of really important goals the previous campaign. Right, James, who would get into the Seville side from Ange's team?
Seville's obviously a bit before my time. My time as a Celtic fan sort of really started in the Stratton era, but there's all the sort of younger Celtic fans I've done. You go back and watch the teams that everybody's talked about. So I would have Joe Hart coming in for Rab Douglas. I would maybe have Juranovic in for a gap. CCV in for Baldy, McGregor in for Neil Lennon. Then we're unlucky because we've got so many good strikers in the team right now.
Yep.
We've got Kyogo and Yakimakis, but realistically, they don't come close to Hartson, Sutton or Larsson putting them out of that team. So I'd have Hart, Carter, Vickers and potentially McGregor in for Lennon.
Interestingly, the bench was quite weak. with players like Fernandez on the bench, so I'm pretty sure Kyogo would have made the bench, that's for sure. But we're only chewing the fat on that one. We know it will never happen. I like talking about hybrid teams. We're looking at the fact that we are going to be celebrating our 5th anniversary very, very soon. AXOM, that is. We are having a big launch event for the wider media company of A State of Mind up in Edinburgh at the St James Quarter. It's free. We're going to have a full day of entertainment, going back to what you were saying. Brian, Kevin Graham might turn up with a few books to sign, but we will announce the full bill of events over the next couple of weeks. There are some tremendous names on there in actual fact. But 5 years, yeah, something to be celebrated. I'm going to be celebrating the 5 rather than the 70 over the next couple of weeks and months. What do you think should be Celtic's target, Brian, in the next 5 years? Where should Celtic be in 5 years' time? So if we go back 5 years, 2017, we're dominating Scottish football. Brendan Rodgers is the man. And we're basically intoxicated by what he's done, the culture that he's implemented at Celtic. But in the back of my mind, as well as dominating Scottish football, I wanted to make inroads into Europe. I've not done that 5 years on. Where should we really be in 5 years, Brian? What do you reckon?
So, a slightly boring answer, because I want to speak about the sort of back structure of the club. But obviously, again, aspirations, you want to be competing at the highest level in Europe and doing it consistently. And whether we have to qualify, whether we're going to group stages, you want us to be in Champions League year on year. Just that exposure and that experience will serve the club well. So that's where I want us to be in terms of on the park. Off the park, hopefully Ange will still be there by that time, but irrespective, I want us to have a real pathway for youth players to come through. I want us to have a culture at the club where, regardless of who the coach is, we've got an infrastructure in place that suits this style of football. So like Leipzig, Dortmund, Brentford, Salzburg, or these sort of clubs who have a sort of structure in place behind the scenes where it almost doesn't matter who the coach is, because you're signing your players at a certain age, with certain ability to fit a certain system, and that's Celtic system. And when you either come to play for Celtic or manage Celtic, that's how you play. And then if we have that, and we start recruiting for that just now, 14, 15-year-olds, they should hopefully be making inroads to solid first-team players. So long-term sort of academy filtering in, but it has to be that infrastructure at the club, so as in 10, 20, 30 years, there's always that identity. This is Celtic, this is how we play, these are the players we sign. And actually, I don't think it's that unrealistic, because I spoke before about how the club's very risk-averse. And James, you mentioned earlier about project players we sign. Ange's working within that system, but to better effect. So if you talk about what a project sign is, you go, right, they're under 23, they come for a less fashionable league, but they fit the player profile. Now, we've seen players like that a lot, but we've never had the system in place or the identity. We've just he's under 23, we could probably get a sell-on value, he's a decent player, but I've never considered whether they fit into a system or a culture or a team. Whereas I think Ange might still go with that philosophy of these project players or younger players, but they fit his ideals. And that is a really good way of working. So I actually don't think my sort of lofty structural ambitions are unrealistic. I think we can still work within that framework of being fairly risk-averse, but smart with it. Don't work hard, work smart. And I think that's what we can do. So hopefully in 5 years, compete regularly in Champions League, there's academy players coming through, almost conveyor belt style, like way back in the day. And again, that feeds into that romanticism, doesn't it, of homegrown players. But I think we can get there. I really do. I just think we have to be focused and clear of intention.
I remember you talking, in the same vein at the beginning of the season, prior to Ange coming in, then when Ange came in, Brian, because there was a lot of talk at that time about directors of football, etc., and you were talking about the structural vision. And I'm just thinking about how that would work, and I think it would be a lot easier, for example, when that time comes, be it a 3-year cycle, 5-year cycle, to replace the gaffer. I mean, you're looking for a very specific coach at that point, a very specific manager at that point. And we now know, because we've heard from Dermot Desmond, that every time there's a new manager required, there is a short list of 5. And you just think to yourself, I bet those 5 are from one end of the scale to the next in terms of vision, philosophy, style, all this kind of stuff. Sometimes it could just be profile, because we interviewed at one point the man who's on the back of James's jersey, Henrik Larsson, for the manager's job. Yeah, an absolute icon, an absolute tremendous, legendary player of the modern age. Never a manager. Should never be the manager. No, unless he goes away and proves himself as a manager, he can't step into the fold. So I prefer that vision that you've got, Brian, and I hope that is what the club's going to do. James, my radical view on it would be, where do I see Celtic in 5 years? I've always said this, I see them playing their football elsewhere. I think that in order for us to, actually reach the kind of goals and the aspirations that we have as a football club first and foremost, but also as the high headwinds will be looking at the brand and the global brand and the reach, etc. I think that that's something that we should always aspire to, if possible. Whether or not it happens in my lifetime, I do not know. I thought that the pandemic might have started the ball rolling on that, because I think there's been obviously huge effects throughout European and world football. What is your view on it, James? In 5 years' time, where will Celtic be?
Well, I'm the same as Brian. I hopefully make some progress in Europe, because I've never seen Celtic win a European knockout game in my life. I think the last one was Barcelona 04. Was that the last one?
Yeah.
So I hope some real strides in Europe. If we get some beatable teams in the knockout rounds, we could get a real good push for it. I think you probably won't like me saying this, but I think he'll be gone in the next sort of 5 years. I can see him moving on to the Premier League. He's too good a manager. As far as who would replace him, I hope this would be my dream scenario. It does well at Fleetwood Town, and Scott Brown comes back to manage Celtic. Who would want that? As long as he's fit for the job. I don't want him there just because he used to play for us, jobs for friends sort of thing. If he could prove himself as a manager, I'd love to see Scott Brown managing Celtic.
It's an interesting one. I think I was of an era where whoever the manager was at Celtic, they had played for the club. And that trend was broken, of course, with Liam Brady coming in. The board were apparently trying to do things differently, Brian. It didn't work out, we know that. I'll be watching Scott Brown's career with interest. He was highly rated when working with the youth players at Celtic. I think he was touted for a couple of jobs up here. He's flown the nest, he's away down south, and I will be looking at that as well. We continually talk about transfers during pre-season. It's one of the hot topics, Brian. And I think what's become clear over the last few weeks is that the departures are going to be very important as well, because there's a huge amount of wages tied up in players who are simply not contributing or didn't contribute enough last season. Are they in Ange's plans? Who knows? If one player can be saved, however, from, let's say, Albion Ayeti, Vasilis Barkas, Ismail Asoro, I was going to call him Basil Boli, no, Boli Bolingoli, or Chris Julien, who would it be and why? Is there a player in there that you think Ange can save as a Celtic player?
Probably Julien's the obvious one, because he's, still got a bit of credibility. Barkas, old hologram ones, as I call him, he's no chance Eddie could save him. That's maybe gets best at another club, but not at Celtic. Bolingoli seems to have burnt his bridges. Obviously, behind the scenes, there must be issues with him as well, because he's not featured, pretty much. I think he featured once under Ange or twice. Ayeti, no, again, I don't see it. Sorrow, I don't see it. No, it's going to have to be Julien out of them. But then I don't think Julien's got a future at Celtic either, which is a shame actually, because I think he's so dangerous at attacking the ball, both in his own box and in opposition's box. And I think that's something we actually lack. As good as Starfelt and Carter Vickers have been, they're not really a goal threat as much. Goal at Ibrox aside, obviously. So I would have liked to see more for Julien, but I think his time's probably gone now. But certainly when the rest of them need to all go from me.
I probably agree with that. And again, what's your thoughts on Mikey Johnson? Slightly different, having come through the ranks. Every season seems to be make or break for him. I said that last pre-season. Where are we with Mikey, Brian?
Yeah, I don't think he's a good player, but I don't think he's a Celtic player. I just think his decision making is not sharp enough, and at this age, it has to be. He's had enough first team exposure that and I've not really seen any improvement from him. Like, I think the Mikey Johnson we saw this season is as good as the Mikey Johnson we saw when he first debuted. I don't think and he should be a lot better. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's been enough improvement. I've said before, I think he's like Gary Mackay-Steven. I remember we signed Gary Mackay-Steven from Dundee United, and he was a kind of flair player, and he was tricky, and he was exciting, and we thought, all right, but he was so inconsistent. Decision making was really poor, and he never had the proper final ball. And I think that's the same for Mikey Johnson. Seems like a nice kid. I hope he's going to have a good career, but he's not going to beat Celtic. But then I seem like the grumpy one today because I said none of the loan players that are out will feature for Celtic again either. So I think the various keepers, Duhan, Hazard, I think they'll feature for Celtic again. Urigide, Liam Shaw won't feature again. Boy Robertson won't feature. The various other guys we've got out at lower leagues, I don't see them featuring either. So I think you could be looking at maybe, quick enough, maybe about 13 departures for the squad, like comfortably. Now, even if you're not getting good money for them, the wages that'll free up should easily fund 6 better quality players. So I'm quite comfortable with the outgoings because they would have made a mark if they were going to this stage.
That's my view on Mikey, and I've said before, Ryan, I actually do think he's a good footballer, but I use the example of Lewis Morgan and how his career has gone since he left Celtic. He went to the MLS, he then got another move, he was into Miami's most valuable player, then he gets a move and a couple of £1 million, highly rated over there, the lifestyle, he's enjoying his football. And I think had he not done that, Lewis Morgan, I think there's a potential that he might have gone to a fellow Premier League side, Premiership club, and then what happens next if that doesn't work out? And then you see so many players like that bouncing around the Scottish leagues, or the lower reaches, but maybe third, second tier of English football. Whereas he's gone over to the MLS and he's a very valuable player for both teams that he's played for over there. And I think for me, Mikey Johnson could probably do likewise and make a really good career for himself over there. James, of the players that have been mentioned there, I tend to agree with Brian. I think, Ajeti will be a good striker for someone, but not Celtic. He's got age on his side. Barkas, for me, listen, I know he came in with, international pedigree, Champions League experience. The guy is just anonymous. He doesn't have the stature. You look at the pictures of the body beautiful Joe Hart on the beach. You look at Fraser Foster, the Man Mountain. They had presence. And even Craig Gordon, he's quite a lanky kind of guy, quite a slim guy, but he still had presence. I never saw any of that in Barkas. And we need to cut our losses there. Sorrell, really disappointed in him, I think, for a dozen games under Lenny. Unexpectedly came in. He played well in Europe. He did very well until the food poisoning, meant that he couldn't play in the Scottish Cup final. Ball and golly, time to go. He's not even training with Celtic. And Julien, probably still question mark for me. Could happen. I think there is absolutely no love lost either way for Ange. He's basically viewed the attitude and performance and application of Stephen Welsh, and quite rightly thinks he's above him in the pecking order. Julien might be saying, well, I'm one of the big players. I'm a high-profile player. I need football. And he does at 29. So that might be elsewhere as well. Are we losing all of them, do you think? And what's your views on Mikey Johnson as well, James?
Well, I'll just cover, if I was to save one player first, I would save Christopher Jullien. I'm actually a big fan of Christopher Jullien. I think the time off that he's had has made a lot of people forget how good of a player he actually was before the injury and before even the COVID season. You've just got to look at man of the match away to Lazio, scored the winning goal at home to them, man of the match in his first derby at Ibrox, a winning goal in a cup final. A bad player doesn't get those sort of accolades. Mm-hmm. I think there's still a role he can play in this team. I think he's a better player than Stephen Welsh, and you've just got to look at. It's not as bad as it was during the COVID season, but there's still a problem at set pieces for Celtic, I think, in both boxes, offensively and defensively. Whenever Celtic get a free kick in a dangerous area or a corner, I don't think very many people are sat there expecting anything to come of it, really, because we never score from those sort of chances. And then we're not as worried as we were in the COVID season from corners, but it's still a bit of a problem that we're conceding. We don't concede a lot of goals, but a lot of them do come from corners. I think Julian's still got a role to play, but we just can't offer him the game time to do that. And a player of his quality isn't going to accept sitting on the bench, as you said, Paul. So I think the best of his career, he'll probably get a move away, but I'd love us to keep him. On Mikey Johnson, I think, so you hear the groans around Celtic Park whenever his number comes up on the scoreboard. I think that says all about Mikey Johnson at Celtic. He had all the potential, but his decision making in the final third, as Brian mentioned, plus the injury record, I think he's just not going to be Celtic quality. I think is he 2 or 3 years older than Abada as well? And you look at the season Abada's just had, I think his time's gone, his time's passed at Celtic.
It's a shame. And again, this is a wee bit kind of like asking you something that is not possible, but obviously there was a huge amount of players leaving the club as Ange was coming in. We got a couple of glimpses of the likes of Edouard and Christie under Ange Postecoglou. I've threw it into the mix previously. I've thrown it into the mix rather that El Yunusi might have thrived under Ange, that Ayer might have thrived under Ange. Any players that departed, Brian, that you think would have been staples of this Ange Postecoglou team? Including the loanees, by the way, like, El Yunusi and Shane Duffy, Laxalt, John Joe Kenny. I'm going to throw the names at you here. Any of them do you think might have thrived under Ange?
I think the obvious one is Christie, because we saw initially, his performances at the start of the season were excellent, and then he it was almost Drogic-esque, and that suddenly sort of went, hold on a second, we forgot how good this guy can be. So he's the obvious answer, but the Lex Sophie's answer is Laxalt. I thought he would be excellent under Ange. Now, you saw in flashes with Laxalt what he could do. If you consider the way Ange likes his fullbacks to operate and what impact he likes them to have in a game, the way he likes them to come inside and sort of interchange with the midfielder, the winger, almost in a triangle. I think Laxalt's made for that. He actually started out as a winger initially anyway, so he would have been the one that I thought that for a while, actually, kind of midway through the season. I thought Laxalt would have been brilliant under Ange. He was rotten under Lennon, but I genuinely think he would have. I think he'd have been excellent, really thrived under Ange. He was a clever footballer. He just was the wrong footballer in the wrong team at the time. So Christie and Laxalt for me would have been the two.
Well, it is interesting because when you remember back, James, when Laxalt comes into the side, a wee bit like Sorrell, when he came into Neil Lennon's side, that first run of games, that first wave of games, they looked like really tidy players, and then it all just fell off the edge of a cliff for both of them. We've had Stevie Boy coming in to say Frimpong would have thrived, and Pete McGee reckons Christie and El Yunusi would both have benefited from playing under Ange. I think their work rate, their defensive qualities would have worked for them. Brian reckons Laxalt, he's thrown that one into the mix. What's your take, James?
I know it was 6 months before Ange's time, but as the commenter said, I didn't quite catch that name. Jeremy Frimpong would have been unreal in this system. Now he's linked with Barcelona now, so that says everything you need to know about Jeremy Frimpong. This system, Ange's style, is tailor-made for Jeremy Frimpong. He would have been so good in this system. But as far as the summer sales, I would have to go Ryan Christie. I mean, they think he had, 4 goals and 4 assists, something like that, before he left. Was it deadline day he left? It was around that sort of time. But you saw him playing in the system. He had man of the match performances against Dundee, St Johnstone, the Hammerons at the start of the season. He was a key part of that. I would have loved him to stay on, but his time at Celtic was done. But I would have said Frimpong and Christie would be my 2 choices.
No, very, very interesting conversation indeed. Someone was also throwing Dembele into the mix, I think, just to ask, what the future holds. We had a wee chat there before you came in. James, yesterday was his contract completed at Celtic. He's now, as far as I know, he's now a free agent. So he will be, I'm sure, talking to a host of clubs.
He might be going to Bournemouth, I think. His brother plays for Bournemouth now. He's saying that he wants to play with Karamoko at some point. So I don't know if he'd go to Bournemouth if they would take him on, but it's just an option.
It is, and we had a really good discussion, and I'm sure it'll come back up. We might dedicate a show to it at some point during the season, beyond the Axon Bulletin, whereby I was talking to Brian about how the change of approach, the fact that there is a vision which might not have been there, and there is a pathway that might not have been there before, might stop that swathe of young talent from leaving. And I named 10 players. Dembele was included in that, although he was a slightly different case because he had that first team experience over a period of time, making his debut as a 16-year-old. I actually forgot about Conor McBride, who went to Blackburn Rovers. So there's 11 on this list of, academy players. Is Okoflex, is he an academy player? We brought him into the academy from Arsenal, who we lost. And do you think that Ange might be the man that can stop that from happening? Or are we at a stage where if a Liverpool or an Arsenal, West Ham, Leeds United come in and they dangle that carrot, which is financial mainly, at a young kid who probably isn't anywhere near Celtic's first team, there is naught we can do about that?
Yeah, listen, I think that's always going to be the case. I think even for first team players, that's going to be the case, right? If Liverpool or Real Madrid come in for one of your players, they're probably going to go, right? That's just reality. Unless you're the top of the pile, it's always going to be the case. So I don't think that's limited to just our academy players. I think Ange will be the man to change it, but again, it has to depend on the structure. The players that have been let go, obviously excellent young potential, but do they fit the remit for Ange's style of football and his team? We don't know. And this is the problem. We are constantly changing the manager and the philosophy. So if you look at guys that Ronnie Dyler might have brought in youth players that he felt would fit him in a couple of years, then he leaves, Rodgers comes in, he goes, right, they're no my guys, let's get some other guys. They don't fit either. Then Lenny comes in, then Ange. So you go, well, if you keep doing this, they're never going to fit. And if you keep chopping and changing your philosophy, how on earth can these guys that have been signed to play a certain way fit into that? You might get 2 or 3 that are just good enough that they can fit in any philosophy. But unless you're recruiting for a system or a style, it's never going to work. I think Ange has to be looking at buying guys 14, 15, 16 that he thinks in a couple of years' time will be able to fit into his team. Yeah. And that's how we progress. Because if we don't have that system in place, it'll always be the same, and there'll be very few players come through. I know that doesn't sound very optimistic, but that's the current reality.
It makes sense, though. If Okoflex is a great example. Brendan Rodgers brings him in, but then he doesn't play. The only reason he ever did play was after the Dubai, which we're not going to bring up on today's show. Come on, it's been a good day. It's been a good day, mainly because we have welcomed back Brian Degnan, long-time contributor to A Celtic State of Mind, and we have welcomed for the second appearance, I think, James, but the second of many more, let's hope, on a Wednesday, of James Mackenzie. Welcome to the Axom cult, as it's often called. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved in the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video. If you're watching on Facebook, share. If you're watching on Twitter, retweet. Do all that kind of stuff, spread the word, and we'll keep growing and giving you free content every single day. All that's left for me to say, Brian Degnan and James Mackenzie, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.